so happy we alive.
Probably within 5 years after that, you're going to have an active national debate on why don't we take the full step and legalize marijuana where we have a legally regulated and controlled market. So we're 5 to 10 years away, I think. Gore or Bradley? Probably doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference. Right now, I don't think either one of them have the courage to take an honest position on marijuana policy. Perhaps from what I read, Vice President Gore may have more personal experience with marijuana, and if that's true, I suppose perhaps we could hope he would be a little more supportive of our position. But I'm not expecting a lot from either one of them.
And what's the next highlight you expect in this conference?
Well, the next panel is on race and marijuana prohibition, negative impacts it has on minority communities. That's always an exciting area, racial profiling, issues like that. Followed by the next speaker after this panel is dealing with the anti-marijuana fungus, which is something a lot of people haven't even heard about. It's a very scary concept in Florida. That's right. They're thinking about introducing it into Florida. It's an environmental nightmare if they ever do that. So we got a lot of exciting things coming up.
Thanks, Keith.
Recognize that, especially with the issue of marijuana prohibition, sometimes it comes across as only being an interest for white middle-class people who can sort of have the luxury of dealing with this issue. In fact, I think it has an enormous impact on the minority community, and this panel today is well suited to tell us more about that. The chair of this panel is an attorney, Deborah Small. She is a native New Yorker and says she's a proud graduate of the City College of New York and Harvard Law School. Before assuming her current position at the Linda Smith Center, she was legislative director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. It was during this period that she became an ardent advocate for drug policy reform, as she became increasingly aware of the number of young black men and women incarcerated for drug offenses. As director of public policy for the Linda Smith Center, she regularly speaks to the public, including elected officials, religious and community leaders, as well as parents, about issues relating to our government's failed drug policy. She has become a major player in the drug policy reform area in the last couple of years. Please welcome Deborah Small.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm going to speak quickly. One, because I want to be brief, but I have a lot I want to say possible. And two, because I am a native New Yorker. You know, even when people are high, they smoke. They smoke, they talk very, very quickly. And I haven't gotten that far away from the habits I developed. I want to talk about the issue of race and marijuana, but I have to admit that some of the conversation that we had earlier this afternoon have caused me to change a little bit, to alter a little bit some of the things that I want to talk about. I don't think, or at least it shouldn't come as a surprise to people, to realize that there's a racist component in the way that the marijuana laws are enforced in the United States. Lauren Siegel touched on it a little bit when she was talking about the issue of arrest of juveniles in New York City. And I want to pick up from there and move forward. I want to make the point that just in the year 1998, New York City arrested 43,000 people for marijuana. Only out of the over 100,000 arrests that they make generally, 1 in 10 was for a marijuana offense. Of that number, of the 43,000 that were arrested, 34,000 of those people were arrested only for possession. Less than 9,000 of the arrests were alleging that the person tried to sell. And as she pointed out, these arrests, which have escalated in the past 6 years, are part of Giuliani's overall campaign, supposedly to improve the quality of life in New York. But I, as an African American and a parent, I have a son who's 22 and who spent the better part of his adolescence living in Giuliani's New York. I want to say that the quality of life that he's talking about is not the quality of life for all New Yorkers. It's the quality of life for New Yorkers who happen to be fortunate enough to live in Manhattan between Lower Manhattan to maybe 116th Street. For everybody else, the last few years have begun to take on the color of a nightmare. Now, that's not to say that crime has not gone down substantially in New York, and that people who live in quote-unquote high crime communities have not benefited from the drop in crime. But the price that people have had to pay in order to supposedly get these results, I say, is way too high a price to pay in a country that calls itself a democracy. And when we started the conference this morning and people were talking about the whole notion of liberty and quoting from John Stuart Mills and talking about the founding fathers and what they had in mind at the time that they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I can't help but say that the thought that kept coming up into my mind is that the conversation that white Americans have about the founding of America is very different from the conversation that black Americans have about the founding of America. And I think that it's important for me to put that out there today because it's relevant to the issue that we're talking about, which is that there was an essential contradiction that's been inherent in this society from its very founding, and that the liberty that Jefferson and Washington and others talked about was liberty that in their mind was reserved primarily for white men with property. Over time, that liberty has been extended to white men who didn't have property, and eventually to white women, and then eventually to black women and to black men. But I would like to suggest to people that we have never truly embraced the notion of having an equal society which accords an equal amount of liberty for all of its citizens, and that we have, over the course of our history, replaced one system of racial subjugation for another. So we started out with the system of slavery that was the most blatant example of racial subjugation. And eventually we fought a war and got rid of that, and replaced it shortly thereafter with another system of racial subjugation, which was known as segregation. Now, in some places, it existed as a matter of law. In other places, it existed as a matter of fact, but it existed everywhere throughout the U.S. I was born in 1955, so I came of age as an American during the period that the civil rights movement was developing. And as a result, my life was shaped by that. You know, my thinking about American politics was shaped by the struggle that I saw going around me by black people asserting their right to be treated equally. And I grew up believing that I was lucky enough to be born into a period where Americans were really committed to fulfilling on the promises of the Constitution. And I have to say that at the age of 44, I'm now of the conclusion that that belief was somewhat illusory and misplaced. Because from my vantage point, we replaced segregation by law and by fact by another system that allows us to be able to engage in racial subjugation. And that is the way that we enforce drug prohibition in America. It has replaced segregation as the way in which we keep down racial minorities and marginalize people and prevent them from being able to be full citizens. And in fact, you know, as Mark Maurer will talk about some more, we have taken it to the point that we are stripping people of their rights as citizens, the right to vote, based on their drug use and their conviction for crimes involving drugs. And the number of African Americans who have been affected, who have been effectively disenfranchised as a result of drug law enforcement boggles the mind. Now, how I really came to me personally, how this was a new form of racial subjugation, was one day when my son was about 18 and on his way to work. And it was a very, very cold day this time of year, like it is now. And he left the house, and he used to have to walk like 7 blocks to the subway station. So about 20 minutes after he left, he came back in the house. And I was like, why are you back home? I mean, it's freezing outside. Why did you come back?